Good morning. My name is Jennifer Collins, and I am the Dean of SMU Dedman School of Law, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 13th Annual Symposium on Emerging Intellectual Property Issues. The symposium today is sponsored by the Tsai Center for Law, Science, and Innovation and the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice. I think you are in for an incredibly interesting day because I cannot imagine a more timely topic. The focus of this year's symposium is intellectual property and social justice. Intellectual property policy has a significant impact on traditional social justice concepts such as equality, human rights, and the fair allocation of community resources. This year, we have invited leading academics and practitioners to discuss important issues such as access to the patent system for entrepreneurs, disparaging trademarks, non-traditional artistic expression, employee mobility, and access to medicine. We hope that the ideas shared today will illuminate how intellectual property rights impact social justice issues in our community and around the globe. I have the honor of thanking some very special people who have been instrumental in putting the program together today. First is Professor Lateef and Mtima, Professor of Law at Howard University Law School and the founder and director of the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice. I would also like to thank Professor Stephen Jamar, Professor of Law at Howard University School of Law, who is the Associate Director for the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice. One of our very special alums is here, to whom we are very grateful, Director Hope Shimabuku, who is the Director of the Texas Regional United States Patent and Trademark Office. We are grateful to our keynote speaker for joining us today, Professor Peter Manel, who is the Corrett Professor of Law and the co-director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. I also have to thank some special SMU individuals. First, to our wonderful students who are working so hard making sure today runs smoothly. Thank you for all they are doing. To Rebecca Bell and the amazing communications team of Christy Offenberger and Lynn Dempsey, who made sure you knew what was going on today and then made sure you would have a wonderful experience once you got here. And finally, to our amazing directors, Professors Keith Robinson and David Taylor, who have taken an idea for a center and amazingly managed to get it funded and put together wonderful programming like you are about to enjoy today. I am so grateful they are part of the Dedman School of Law community. I hope you enjoy your day. If we can help make your stay more pleasant in any way, please just let us know, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Dean Collins. Good morning to everyone. My name is Keith Robinson. I'm an associate professor here at the Dedman School of Law, and I'm also one of the co-directors of the Tsai Center for Law, Science, and Innovation. On behalf of my co-director, Professor David Taylor, we'd like to welcome you to this symposium on emerging intellectual property issues. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your continued support. For this year's event, well, before I get into that, let me just make one administrative note that Rebecca asked me to do. If you are interested in earning CLE credit for the state of Texas, there are lime green sheets in the back. Please make sure that you go fill those out and put your information on those. We are approved for 5.5 hours of CLE credit today. All right, so with that said, so for this year's event, we partnered with the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice, and this event could not have taken place without the guidance and effort of Professor Lateef Mtima, who's the founder and director of that institute. And I'm gonna ask him to come up and give some opening remarks and tell you a little bit about intellectual property and social justice and some of the ideas we hope to exchange today.
Thanks, Keith. Well, thank you, Keith. Thank you, Dean. It is just such an honor to be here with you today. It's sort of like a dream come true to be at a fantastic intellectual property center at a major university. And not only are we focusing in on IP, which of course is the most important area of the law in the world today, but to also unite it with questions of social justice. Intellectual property social justice has come just such a long way. My own involvement with it back when I was a practitioner in the 80s and 90s, like many other practitioners and scholars and jurists, we were all concerned with many of the social inequities and injustices that we saw in society arising in connection with intellectual property law and intellectual property endeavor. Some of us were looking at it from the point of view of imbalances in the entertainment industry and the fact that there were various artists from marginalized communities not receiving either the financial benefit or even sometimes the credit for their contributions. There were others looking at the same issues from the perspective of access to health, access to medicine, in the development context, insofar as the developing world was concerned. And the thing of it is that pretty much everybody agreed that these were problems, and these were problems that needed attention, but few considered that the solutions could come from the intellectual property law itself. For the most part, the prevailing thinking throughout most of the 20th century was that intellectual property, it is a consumption commodity. That's what its primary focus is. And that the intellectual property law, it is exclusively an economic incentive mechanism that was largely agnostic towards questions of social responsibility. Fortunately, there were some, both in the academy, some on the bench, some practitioners who began to consider the reality that intellectual property, it does have a function, a social utility function in the total political economy. It is to advance our culture. It is to move our society forward insofar as technological innovation and endeavor is concerned. But we also recognize that the intellectual property law, it cannot fulfill that function unless it is considered to be an engine for social progress as well as technological progress, and that it has to be pervasively embraced and respected by everyone in society as an engine that will benefit society as a whole and individuals, and to move us forward in a socially progressive way. So when I founded the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice, the perspective was, let's move away from this notion that any remedies that we will come up in society to deal with these social inequities will always have to come from outside of the intellectual property law. Much of this work can be done by re-envisioning and reimagining what the intellectual property law is to be about and what it is to accomplish. In a society such as ours, in which we have an express edict that the purpose of intellectual property protection is to promote the progress of the arts and sciences, well, we have that objective there as part of the constitutional mandate. In creating this particular program as part of the Institute's work, the thinking was, we have some activity going on in terms of scholarship in the Intellectual Property Academy, but in those days there was very little focus on practitioners, and we thought that wouldn't it be fantastic if we created a program in which practitioners could come and learn about and keep abreast of the emerging and cutting-edge intellectual property developments in the field, but also be able to consider those issues within the context of social justice and its impact on greater and wider issues in society as a whole. And speaking of scholarship, before I close and let us get on with the substantive program, I did want to make one acknowledgement. Obviously, there has been a lot going on now in the field, and I think that we are now about to experience an important watershed moment. One of our leading intellectual property scholars in the country, we're very fortunate to have today Professor Peter Noel, who will be the keynote speaker. And, the great thing about leading scholars is that, of course, they have these intellectual property superpowers, but great leading scholars, what do? They use those powers for the greater good. So we're particularly fortunate that Professor Noel is turning his lens towards this issue of intellectual property and social justice. And I don't want to give away any of his fantastic talk today, but just to give you a little hint, one of the things that I was particularly impressed about as when he turned his analytical lens towards this issue is that, and you'll see a little bit of this later on today, he has created what is really an analytical taxonomy for intellectual property and social justice. So while many of us have been focusing in on particular issues and we've been moving the ball forward in certain directions, we now are about to see a structural framework for this area of the law, something that obviously practitioners and judges are really going to need to rely on so that we can move this from issues of scholarly thinking and policy into the way in which we practice and apply the law on an everyday basis. So with that, I'm going to, I'm not in the way of your being able to have lunch just yet, but I am in the way of your being able to enjoy this fantastic program. So with that, I'm going to sit down, turn it back over to Keith, and he'll get us started with the first incredible panel for the day. Thank you very much.